1:18 p.m. local time. Midday above the Caribbean Sea. The sky was clear, the air was steady, and the water below gave no hint that anything unusual was about to happen. High overhead, a single U.S. Navy fighter jet moved smoothly along its assigned route. Engines balanced, sensors active, the pilot locked into the familiar rhythm of a routine patrol. No drama, no spotlight, just another mission that could have easily passed without notice. Then the tone sounded. A sharp, unmistakable alert cut through the cockpit. Radar lock detected. Not a harmless scan, not a distant signal passing through. This was direct, deliberate, and focused. A weapons-grade tracking lock. The pilot stayed composed. Training took over immediately. Eyes shifted to the threat display. Bearing confirmed. Distance shrinking fast. This was no accident. Somewhere off the jet's left side, still beyond visual range, Venezuelan fighters were closing in. Low altitude, high speed, aggressive approach. And they were not following standard intercept procedure. No radio contact, no identification request, no warning on international frequencies, just pressure. In military aviation, there is a clear line between observation and intimidation. Observation means watching. Intimidation begins the moment someone signals they are ready to take things further. That line had just been crossed. Inside the cockpit, the warning pulsed again. The lock remained steady. At that range, time compresses fast. From lock to action can take only moments. There is no long discussion, no pause for debate, only instinct, training, and the awareness that one wrong move can turn a patrol into a major international crisis. The pilot made a slight course correction, not evasive, not provocative, just enough to alter the geometry. Countermeasures were armed, but not released. No flares, no electronic interference, not yet. Discipline mattered. Every second of this would be recorded, reviewed, and analyzed later in exact detail. Outside, the Caribbean looked unchanged. Sunlight flashed across the water. No trails in the sky. No visible chaos. Only silence and speed. Then came visual contact. A Venezuelan jet sliced into view, crossing at low altitude, close enough for the pilot to make out the markings, the airframe, the heat shimmer spilling from its engines. It was not a cautious pass. It was not friendly. It was a message. Moments later, a second jet followed, tighter, closer, more forceful. From a distance, it might have looked like confidence, even dominance. Two fighters pressing a single aircraft in open airspace, a display meant to send a message both at home and across the region. But appearances can mislead. What the Venezuelan pilots likely believed was that they were confronting a lone aircraft, far from support, operating quietly over international waters. They may have assumed that flying close would unsettle it, that noise and proximity would create leverage. What they did not see was everything beyond that moment. They did not see the larger network observing the encounter in real time. They did not see the sensors watching from beyond the horizon. They did not realize that every radar emission, every radio call, every burst of heat from their engines was being collected, logged, and stored. The closer they came, the more they exposed. Inside the American jet, the pilot remained steady. No abrupt turns, no escalation, just precise flying and constant awareness. The rules of engagement were clear. Do not act unless directly threatened. Do not provoke, and let the facts speak for themselves. And the facts were speaking clearly. Every aggressive move revealed something. Every lock-on added detail. Step by step, the Venezuelan pilots were revealing their procedures, their capabilities, and their limits. What began as pressure was becoming something else, a stream of intelligence handed over in real time. For the Venezuelan pilots, the moment probably felt powerful. Jets roaring past an American aircraft, a visible challenge, a scene that could be turned into footage, headlines, and a narrative of defiance. But in modern conflict, the loudest move is often the most costly mistake. Because while they believed they were applying pressure, they were actually stepping into a situation shaped by patience, control, and information. By the time the second pass ended and the Venezuelan jets began widening their arc, nothing visible had happened. No weapons released, no direct exchange, no open clash. But the balance of the encounter had already changed. What started as an attempt to intimidate had quietly turned into a serious miscalculation, one that would carry consequences far beyond the Caribbean sky. And the pilots making those close passes likely had no idea. Not yet. From Caracas, the decision may have looked measured. In the days before the encounter, Venezuelan military activity across the Caribbean had increased quietly. More patrols, more flight hours, greater visibility. It was not preparation for full-scale conflict. It was signaling, a reminder that Venezuela still intended to project influence in a region long shaped by overwhelming U.S. air and naval presence. The fighters that moved toward the American jet were not there by chance. They had been guided in deliberately, directed by ground controllers looking at the same radar picture, following the same symbols, calculating the same intercept path. This was not a casual pass, it was a test, a pressure move designed to force a reaction without tipping into open confrontation. At least that was the idea. The problem was in the way they carried it out. Standard intercepts follow an understood pattern. Identify, communicate, maintain separation, reduce tension. Even rival forces recognize those rules because the alternative is chaos at extreme speed. That did not happen here. Instead, the Venezuelan jets arrived fast, low, and close. Close enough to trigger repeated cockpit warnings. One of them shifted briefly from search mode into tracking mode again, deliberately. That detail mattered. A radar lock is not just a technical action, it is a statement. In military aviation, it says, I have you in my system. I can take the next step. Even when nothing is launched, the meaning is obvious. And intent is exactly what rules of engagement are built around. Inside the American cockpit, the threat receiver confirmed what the pilot already understood. This was no longer routine harassment. The situation had escalated. Even so, the response stayed controlled. No flares, no jamming, no sudden break that could be misread as panic or aggression. The aircraft held its path, changed altitude slightly, and maintained speed. The pilot's hands stayed light on the controls, breathing even, posture calm, because provoking an emotional reaction is often the whole point of encounters like this. From the Venezuelan side, the maneuver may have felt effective. Their aircraft had the visual advantage. They were closer, louder, more dramatic. For a domestic audience, that imagery works well. Fighters challenging an American aircraft, a display of sovereignty, a moment of resistance. But air combat is not theater. Every second they remained close. Every onboard system they activated, every maneuver they executed was being measured. Modern military aircraft are not just flying weapons. They are flying sensor platforms. And when two aircraft come this close, they are not only watching each other, they are studying each other. During one pass, the Venezuelan pilots briefly lit their afterburners, punching through the humid Caribbean air. A bright heat plume erupted behind them, visible even with the naked eye. On infrared systems, it stood out instantly. Their radios crackled with short, clipped transmissions to controllers on shore. Not casual chatter. Tasking updates, heading corrections, intercept coordination. And with each transmission, each radar pulse, each aggressive approach, they revealed more than they intended. Each signal added another layer to an expanding profile. This is the part most viewers never notice, the hidden exchange beneath the obvious one. Radar frequencies, pulse rhythms, communication patterns, how quickly pilots react to instructions, how tightly they hold formation under pressure. Those details matter far more than bravado ever will. Inside the U.S. aircraft, onboard systems quietly captured it all. No drama, no overreaction, just calm, methodical recording, the way professionals operate. There was no need to chase, no need to answer pressure with pressure. The Venezuelan jets were revealing everything on their own. On the second pass, one of the fighters cut in even tighter than before. Close enough for wake turbulence to ripple faintly across the American jet. Close enough that a tiny error, one slight overcorrection, could have turned the encounter into disaster at combined speeds well above 1,000 miles per hour. That was the moment the line became impossible to miss. This was no longer just about making a statement. It had become a contest of control, an attempt to force the American pilot to react first, to see how far the pressure could go without consequence. And that was where the real miscalculation lived, because the U.S. military does not measure strength by noise or proximity. It measures strength through composure, by how well crews operate under pressure, by how much they reveal when challenged, and by how little they give away in return. The American jet did not break off. It did not turn away. It did not escalate. It simply remained on course. And that restraint sent a message of its own, one far more unsettling to the other side. It said, without saying a word, "We are not rattled. We are observing." As the Venezuelan formation widened again, looping back out for distance, the encounter did not end with noise or spectacle. It ended in silence. But by then, the real exchange had already happened. Venezuela had tried to apply pressure through aggression. Instead, it had exposed itself, its habits, its tactics, its limits, to a system built to absorb provocation and turn it into advantage. And the pilots involved likely believed the moment was over. They had no idea that what they had just done would shape everything that followed. From the outside, it looked like restraint. No countermeasures, no warning shots, no aggressive pursuit. Just an American jet holding steady while Venezuelan fighters circled, pressed in, and eventually eased away. To an untrained eye, that might have looked passive. It was not, it was deliberate. Modern military aviation is not only about what a pilot sees through the canopy. It is about what the aircraft is quietly collecting in the background. And during those tense minutes over the Caribbean, the American jet was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. Every radar sweep that touched the airframe was recorded. Every radio transmission across open frequencies was captured. Every heat spike from engines pushed hard was logged. Piece by piece, the full picture was being built. The Venezuelan pilots believed proximity gave them leverage, that flying closer made them appear stronger. But in reality, proximity creates exposure. The closer an aircraft gets, the clearer its signature becomes. And signatures are like fingerprints, distinct, measurable, and impossible to erase once recorded. When the Venezuelan fighters changed radar modes, even briefly, they revealed far more than they likely intended. Radar is not just a beam, it is a language. Pulse repetition, frequency changes, scan behavior. Those details help analysts identify what system is being used, how it is configured, and how it behaves when pressure rises. That kind of information matters. The American aircraft did not need to respond with interference or matching lock-ons. It did not need to fill the sky with flares. Silence was enough. The quieter one side remained, the more the other side exposed. As the Venezuelan jets maneuvered, their formation loosened slightly. Small deviations, minor timing differences, the kind of imperfections that never appear in polished footage but stand out immediately to trained observers. Those subtle details reveal training standards, command discipline, and real operational readiness. Then there was the heat. At one point, one of the Venezuelan pilots pushed the engines harder, perhaps to hold position, perhaps to make an impression. The afterburner flare was brief, but on infrared systems, it stood out clearly. Temperature profile, exhaust pattern, throttle response. More pieces added to the file. None of this required confrontation. The American jet stayed steady, recording, measuring, remembering. Every onboard system was doing exactly what it had been built to do. This was not a duel. It was an assessment. And the Venezuelan pilots never realized they were the ones being measured. When they finally widened their arc and moved off to a safer distance, they likely felt they had made their point. They had flown aggressively. They had forced attention. They had shown they were willing to challenge a U.S. aircraft in open airspace. But the reality was less flattering. They had just handed over something far more valuable than a brief moment of intimidation. They had provided a snapshot of how they operate when pressure rises, how they maneuver, how they communicate, how their systems behave when pushed. In a modern military environment, that kind of insight is extremely valuable. This is the part that rarely makes headlines. No dramatic footage, no explosive moment to replay. Just data. Quiet, precise, and permanent. Collected, analyzed, and shared across a network far larger than a single aircraft. By the time the Venezuelan jets turned for home, the encounter was already over in the most meaningful sense. The American pilot continued the mission exactly as planned. Calm, professional, unshaken. No deviation, no emergency response, just a clean continuation of flight. But elsewhere, far beyond the Caribbean, analysts would begin breaking down everything that had been collected. Not emotionally, not politically, clinically. They would note which systems were active and which were not. How quickly the pilots reacted to cues, where hesitation appeared, where confidence held, where patterns emerged, and patterns are what militaries prepare for. The Venezuelan pilots may have thought they were confronting a single aircraft. What they actually encountered was a system, one that rewards patience and punishes impulsive decisions. By choosing intimidation over disengagement, they had stepped into a space where every move became information. And once that information is gathered, it does not simply disappear. The sky over the Caribbean returned to calm. The aircraft separated. The moment passed. But the consequences did not. Because from that point on, the encounter was no longer about who flew closer or louder. It was about who understood more. And in that exchange, the advantage had shifted decisively, without a single shot being fired. From the outside, it seemed like nothing had happened. No launches, no emergency press conference, no sudden wave of headlines. The Venezuelan jets broke contact, the American aircraft stayed on mission, and the Caribbean returned to its usual calm. But a lack of visible reaction does not mean there was no response. In modern military operations, the most important developments often happen far from the camera. Within minutes of the encounter ending, the information collected during those close passes was already moving. Not dramatically, not urgently, just efficiently, through secure channels to places the Venezuelan pilots would never see. Radar logs, infrared captures, communication fragments, time-stamped, geo-referenced, complete. This is what restraint looks like when it is backed by capability. The American pilot filed a routine report. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. Time, bearing, distance, system activity, aircraft behavior, every detail that mattered and nothing that did not. That report would become one piece of a much larger picture, because the jet over the Caribbean was never operating alone. It was part of a layered system built to absorb pressure without responding impulsively. Sensors in the air, at sea, and in orbit all fed into the same architecture. What one aircraft observed, others could confirm. What one system detected, others could cross-check. The Venezuelan pilots may have believed they were dealing with one opponent. In reality, they were interacting with an entire network, and that network does not respond emotionally. Instead of escalation, the posture shifted quietly. Patrol patterns were adjusted, coverage windows refined, contingency plans reviewed. Not as a dramatic response, but as part of standing readiness. No new rules were needed. The existing rules were simply reinforced. This is the part opponents often misunderstand. They expect response to look like retaliation, something visible, loud, unmistakable, a dramatic display. But for a professional force, response is about position, not performance. The U.S. aircraft kept flying, and so did others. Not in parade formation, not as spectacle, just present, persistent, predictable in the way that matters most. Always there. The encounter was brief, but it did not vanish. It became a reference point. Another entry in a growing body of information used to better understand regional behavior. Nothing about the encounter was lost. Elsewhere, what had been gathered fed directly into training cycles and long-term planning, not just for the next day, but for years ahead. Because what truly matters is not what a force can do on its best day. It is what it does under pressure, when time shrinks, options narrow, and instinct takes over. That is what the Venezuelan pilots revealed. From their point of view, the lack of any immediate visible response may have felt like success. No aircraft rushing in, no aggressive pursuit, no public outcry. It may have looked as if the Americans had simply let it pass. They had not. They had documented it. The discipline shown by the U.S. pilot was not accidental. It is trained, reinforced, and expected. Every military aviator understands that restraint under pressure is not weakness. It is control. It keeps choices open. It reduces the chance of mistakes. And it forces the other side to reveal itself first. In this case, that reveal was clear. There were no theatrical follow-up maneuvers, no sudden displays meant to capture attention, because attention was never the objective. Understanding was. As the days passed, nothing on the surface seemed to change. Flights continued, patrols continued. The region appeared stable, at least outwardly, but that normalcy was part of the strategy. When presence becomes routine, intimidation begins to lose its effect. And that is where the real shift took place. By refusing to escalate, the U.S. side denied Venezuela the outcome it was most likely looking for. Drama, validation, reaction. Instead, the incident became another recorded event, stripped of spectacle and emotion. But it mattered. Because in future encounters, that data would influence decisions. It would shape assumptions. It would affect judgments about acceptable risk, safe distance, and the point at which silence says more than speed ever could. The Venezuelan pilots likely walked away, believing they had pushed the line and faced no real consequence. In reality, they had pushed it just far enough to be studied. And the response they never saw, the quiet adjustments, the sharper awareness, the refined understanding, was already underway. All of it happened without a single aircraft breaking formation or a single weapon leaving its rail. In the end, no one opened fire, no debris fell into the sea, no pilot was forced out of an aircraft, no emergency meetings dominated the headlines. On the surface, the incident faded almost as quickly as it appeared. A few tense minutes over international waters, then separation, then silence. But that is not how professional militaries measure outcomes. What matters is not what detonated. What matters is what changed. For Venezuela, the encounter was meant to signal resolve, proof that its Air Force could still challenge American presence in the Caribbean. A message, especially for a domestic audience, that its pilots were ready to fly close, apply pressure, and push back. But pressure without leverage is only noise. By choosing intimidation over professionalism, the Venezuelan pilots revealed more than they intended. They showed how their aircraft behaved near the edge of performance, how formations loosen under strain, how communication patterns shift when decisions must be made in seconds. These are not minor observations. They are operational realities. For the United States, the outcome reinforced a lesson learned over decades of close encounters. Restraint, when backed by capability, creates asymmetry. It forces the other side to act, to emit, to expose itself. The side that remains quiet learns. The side that makes the noise teaches. This was never about dominating an air-to-air encounter. It was about avoiding one entirely and still leaving with the advantage. The American pilot did exactly what doctrine requires. He did not chase drama. He did not seek validation. He held course, maintained discipline, and let the situation reveal itself. That choice kept escalation off the table while preserving every option if the situation changed. That balance is difficult. It requires confidence, not just in the aircraft, but in the system behind it. Confidence that you are not alone. Confidence that restraint will not be misunderstood by those who actually matter. The Venezuelan pilots, by contrast, gambled on proximity. They believed closeness would create control. But in modern air operations, closeness often means vulnerability. It shortens reaction time. It magnifies small mistakes. And it turns every action into information. Once that information exists, it cannot be taken back. From that point on, every future encounter would be shaped by what had been learned in those minutes over the Caribbean. Not emotionally, not politically, practically, quietly, permanently. That is why this was a mistake. Not because it nearly triggered a larger crisis, it did not, but because it created clarity where ambiguity once existed. And uncertainty is often one of the few protections a weaker force still has. There is a reason professional militaries emphasize de-escalation procedures, standardized intercepts, and clear communication. Those rules are not about courtesy. They are about survival. They exist to keep moments like this from turning into irreversible outcomes. When those rules are ignored, even briefly, the cost is rarely paid in the moment. It is paid later, as in planning rooms, in simulations, and in future encounters where the margin for surprise is smaller than it used to be. That day, the Caribbean sky returned to calm. Shipping lanes continued moving, patrols went on. On paper, nothing had changed. In reality, everything had. Because one side learned and the other side revealed. And in modern military competition, that imbalance grows over time. So the question that remains long after the aircraft disappear is this. When pressure comes fast and close, what shows more strength, reacting immediately or remaining completely steady? This time, the answer was written without launches, without warnings, and without spectacle. It was written in discipline. And that is why Venezuela did not just challenge the wrong aircraft. It revealed exactly why it should not have.